The good news is we had so many people register, we had to give up our round tables. The bad news is it's much harder to connect in these kind of horizontal tables than the round ones. So thank you for all being here. We're really glad and excited to kick off another season, the 2015-2016 season. It was this is actually the 99th session together since we began this series over a decade ago. We have a great year. I'm really excited about both inspiring and substantive talks with a wonderful kickoff by our own Kim Cameron. This program, the Positive Links program, is offered by the Center for Positive Organizations, affectionately called CPO, which is an organization which fosters research, dialogue, tools, and courses about trying to build and facilitate positive workplaces. Before we start, none of this would be possible without the generous support of the Joneses. So Diane and Paul, who are up here front, who drive from the west part of the state every Positive Link session, are here to meet with the speakers. Please thank you for your support. My name is Jane Dutton. I'm one of the co-founders of the center, and I wanted a word about the Center for Positive Organizations before the privilege of introducing my colleague, Kim Cameron. The Center for Positive Organizations is closely aligned with the management and organizations area of Ross, which just had the distinctive honor of being part of the reason Ross was named as being the #1 school for undergraduates in the field of management. Go M&O. When you walked by the Winter Garden, you walked by 4 flags, which capture the 4 pillars that distinguish the uniqueness of the Ross School of Business: positive, boundaryless, analytical, and action. And the positive pillar means different things to different people. And I really like the way our dean, Allison Davis Blake, describes it. So I'm going to read to you actually something which is on our website, which I think helps us understand what positive business and the positive pillar might mean. At Michigan Ross, not only will you learn how to positively impact the world's most pressing social and environmental issues, but also to inspire a sense of purpose in others to achieve extraordinary results. Our focus on positive business centers on, first, creating economic value for customers, for shareholders, and society. Second, for creating a great place to work. Third, being a great neighbor in the local community, the nation, and the world. Positive business energizes people and firms. It maximizes your potential and enables you to achieve your highest aspiration. And I think one way to think about the Center for Positive Organizations is we're working a lot on that second purpose of positive business, on trying to generate research and teaching about creating great places for people to work. But our excellence, the school's excellence in positive business arena shows up in our courses, in student experiences, and in multiple centers, not just the Center for Positive Organizations. So if you were to learn more about what the Sanger Leadership Center is doing, what the Erb Institute for Sustainable Enterprise, the Sam Zell and Robert Lurie Institute for Entrepreneurial Studies, William Davidson Institute, and the Center for Social Impact, it's all built into the fabric of Ross. So even though we share the name of positive, which is aligned with the positive pillar, actually this effort around positive business is widely distributed. So I think it's really meaningful and impactful for this series and our center to be part of something bigger, to be part of the pursuit and enabling of positive business. Okay, that's enough sort of pitch about Ross and how we fit and the center and our department. Now I get to the good stuff. I get to introduce my wonderful colleague, Kim Cameron, who is the William Russell Kelly Professor of Management and Organizations. He's what I would call a full spectrum academic. He's directed a research center, he's been a business school dean, a big dean, an associate dean, a dean of executive education, a department chair, a professional association program chair, a prolific researcher, highly impactful teacher, and transformational change agent. It's an honor that he is my colleague and a part of our department and the center. I want to just share ask you a couple of questions. Did you know that Kim, along with his colleague Dave Wetton, has the best-selling management and skills textbook around the globe, which is now in its 8th edition? That's one did you know. Did you know that he and my colleague Bob Quinn developed the competing values framework for organizational cultures and leaders? That's a keystone to what we do in our leadership training here at Ross, but is foundational to cultural and leadership changing, again, around the world. Did you know that he has written or edited 13 scholarly books and been published in more than 120 academic articles? Did you know that he was given the Lifetime Achievement Award from George Mason University this summer for the amazing work he's done on helping universities become centers for student and staff well-being? Did you know that he's generously donated his time to institutions all over the world to try to understand and foster organizational effectiveness and flourishing, most recently with the Detroit public school system? And finally, did you know that Kim and his lovely wife Melinda have 7 children and an amazing number of grandchildren, 21. So please join me in welcoming my amazing colleague, Kim Cameron, who's going to talk to us about taking stock, strengths and limitations in positive leadership. Take it away, Kim.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I am honored and flattered. Are we okay? That you're here, and I really am, because I'm in the midst of, in my academic department, among the very best people on the planet in terms of their scholarship and contribution. I'm in the presence of some people who have revolutionized the world, and literally created the #1 selling pharmaceutical medication on the planet, and who are contributing in lots and lots of ways to us. And the people who are most important are my faculty colleagues, folks who are doing this in the real world, and students who I admire a lot. I don't know any faculty member who could be admitted to the University of Michigan right now. It's way too hard to get in here. So for those reasons, I'm really grateful to be here. I appreciate your coming. Today is Yom Kippur, and there are several folks who are not here because of this sacred day, but for those of you who've come, I appreciate your coming very much. At the beginning of the 15th year of the Center for Positive Organizations, and the 5th year of the pillar in the University of Michigan Ross School of Business focused on positive, it seems like a good time to take stock. And that's what I'd like to do today, is to spend some time looking at what we've done, and particularly looking at the criticisms, the problems. I have a colleague at Northwestern University who wrote a pretty influential article. The reason I became aware of that is that he essentially took on the topic I was studying for the first 10 years of my career, which was the topic of organizational effectiveness. And he explained why there's no research on organizational effectiveness right now. It destroyed that entire concept or field of study. Here's why. There is something that we refer to as a kind of a life cycle in scholarly research. Sort of #1 stage is something gets introduced and people get excited, and gee, this is really referring to a lot of important phenomena, and it's solving a lot of problems for us. It's kind of capturing our attention. And as it turns out, it tends to resonate broadly with folks. The concepts seem to be important. But then stage 3, what are called, or what my colleague Paul Hirsch called, the validity police show up. The validity police are those who challenge definitions. Now wait a minute, what do you really mean by positive? And they challenge certain findings, and they challenge methods, and they challenge validity. Most of the time, those challenges are primarily focused on small studies or incremental issues. It's not, you don't attack the entire field frontally. Rather, you begin nibbling at the edges, saying, geez, I'm not sure this works, or I'm not sure you're really on target here, or I don't think that's a valid finding, I think you're overclaiming, and so on. As a result of that, some of the aspects of these concepts or approaches go away. Some, on the other hand, I mean, seldom does the entire field go away, but sometimes it does. as was the case with the concept of organizational effectiveness. The first book I wrote, in which Bob has a chapter, we wrote several things together a long time ago, Bob Quinn and I, was in the title of those articles was organizational effectiveness. You don't see any articles on organizational effectiveness because essentially the validity police killed it. However, the probability or the possibility exists that positive as a word could be killed similarly. On the other hand, however, sometimes that perspective, those findings, that approach is in fact reinforced. It gets to be stronger and becomes institutionalized. Its impact and influence expand markedly. And so what I'd like to do today is talk about the validity police. Now look, there have been criticisms, in particular in the popular press, regarding this whole notion of positive organizations and positive leadership for quite a few years. And these phrases all are a part of publications. They've all appeared in print, often by airport bookstore kind of people. There's a book, at least, I don't remember exactly the title, but it's something like Why Positive is Killing America, something like that. And so, legitimately people say this denies reality. Reality is not positive. Come on. And it's a values bias, and it's ethnocentric, and it ignores negative phenomena, and it mitigates against hard work. Everybody gets a prize. And avoids difficult questions. It implies boastfulness and pride. You guys think you're the only ones who do anything that's worthwhile. And it leads to reckless optimism and delusional thinking, and all success is deserved, and so on. Well, that exists. But the current validity police are a little more sophisticated than that, because most of these statements are made by people who either caricaturize this notion of positive or who misunderstand it, simply don't know very much about the work that's being done. So what I'd like to do is highlight what I think I've learned after the survey of a lot of research and having some people at conferences show up and say, here's why we don't believe what you're saying. And so what I'm going to do is highlight 5 areas that are particularly issues or concerns for people about our whole focus on positive. One has to do with research. One has to do with cultural and values issues. One has to do with this notion of simplicity and narrowness. It's way too simplistic. Another one has to do with ethics and the manipulation issues. And a final one has to do with the practice of this. So what I'd like to do is talk about these 5 issues and hopefully spend a little bit of time at the end, if you'd like to, asking questions or making comments, at least having a chance to have you talk about what's on your mind. So one of the examples, or one of the reasons people talk about not only positive, but science in general, is recently my colleague Susan Ashford pointed this out to me. More than 250 scientists around the globe tried to reproduce key findings from a sample of articles published in 2008 in 3 leading psychological journals. Results posted online, which occurred on April 24th this year, which are not peer-reviewed, but they nevertheless suggest that the key findings from only 39 of the 100 published studies could be reproduced. Now, in other words, the conclusion of the study is, boy, you can't, this is pretty flimsy research. What's interesting, however, is that researchers have reported they couldn't reproduce results from a lot of studies, including oncology and target drug and validation and sex differences in disease. So studies, I'm going to read this bottom paragraph, studies show a very low reproducibility for articles published in scientific journals, often as low as 10 to 30%. So for example, in biotech, Amgen did these, or at least funded these studies. 100 scientists trying to reproduce the findings in 53 landmark articles on cancer. Only 6 of 53 were reproduced. That's about 10%. In terms of pharmaceutical, Bayer funded a set of studies, 67 targeted validation projects on oncology, women's health, cardiovascular medicine. About 21% could be reproduced. In psychology, you get at least 33 or 39%. It's better. So sure enough, reproducibility is an issue. But the work we do actually might be better than the work that's being done in some of these areas where life and death is at stake. So, here are just some responses to this first issue relating to research. Now, on the one hand, oh, wait a minute, I skipped the issues. Let me talk about the issues first. So the research issues can be summarized by these 3 bullets, but of course there could be many other bullets. One of them is, look, research findings are often invalid, overstated, misleading. Misanalyzing data and misinterpreting or overclaiming are common. Real proof is scarce. That's been claimed by many fellow scientists, colleagues. Second, sweeping claims are made about human nature and the causes of happiness, often based on very few studies, often mainly by college students, people in the labs just worrying about sophomores. And positive psychology and scholarship not guided by an overarching theory or framework. And so it's just random stuff coming out right and left. It's not guided by an explanation of why. Okay. Now look, on the one hand, a lot more empirical research is needed in POS. I don't want this to be a defense of POS, but rather an examination of POS. So we're sort of in the toddler stage of development. We're not even in the teenage, going to have a lot of experimental stage. We're kind of just building a foundation, getting our legs under us. A lot more questions exist that need answers than have been answered. And so, of course, some of the criticisms are valid. On the other hand, there is solid empirical research that confirms some of what we claim. That is, positive phenomena actually does make a difference. And what I want to do is show you some of the results. So some of these criticisms, dismissing the whole field, lack some credibility. So, for example, let me just highlight these. Which one of these? There we go. So up here, this study has been done on this campus. It's been reproduced several times, replicated several times. It's the equivalent as follows. A physician puts a drop of liquid at the bottom of your nostril in which there's cold virus. People breathe in the virus. Some people get sick and some people don't. The question is, well, what explains how you get sick or who gets sick? Lots more to say about this, but as it turns out, happy, optimistic, positive people get sick significantly less often, half the amount of time, as people who are depressed, angry, and cynical. That is, and we won't talk about the theory about why that exists, but we know why that exists. So positive actually causes people to be healthier. This is a study I learned about just a few months ago. So there are some psychologists who believe that people can't think until they can learn language. So, or a language organizes thinking. So here are and I don't happen to believe that, but here are pre-language children, 3 to 8 months old, and they're given the following experience. They're put on the lap of their caregiver or a mother, and they watch about 15 seconds of a puppet show. And the puppet show there are at least 2 different variations on this. One is a puppet tries to come across the stage or climb a little hill, and another puppet either helps or hinders, gets in the way or tries to assist. Or the other task is a puppet tries to open a box, and one puppet tries to help, the other tries to open the box, the other puppet jumps on the box and tries to close it and hinders. Then after 15 seconds of that, they bring these puppets out in front of the child, and the child is given a choice of which puppet do you want to play with. Now for a 3-month-old, they can't grab it, so they then measure eye movement. Which one are you looking at? As it turns out, the conclusion of this study is pretty dramatic. Infants overwhelmingly preferred animals that tried to help, even when the helping was not successful. Almost 90% of the time, they prefer virtuous behavior. The explanation for that is that there is a heliotropic effect that exists in all human beings. That is, all living systems are inclined toward positive, away from negative, toward that which is life-giving, away from that which is life-depleting, even from 3 months old. Okay. This study. One of the major focuses of the criticism is a colleague who used to be here, is now at North Carolina, who has done research showing that a ratio of positive to negative of about 3 to 1, 3 positive to every negative or above, in fact produces positive outcomes. There's been a lot of criticism about the methodology, but she's really solid in her work. So if you have a 3 to 1 ratio in terms of positive communication, positive relationships, and so on, you live longer, you get sick less often, you survive and recover from serious accidents or illness, you stay married longer, you tolerate pain better, you work harder, you perform better on the job, and so on. That is, positive experiences actually do have impact on people's performance. And we're talking only about individuals here. And then this study I just like, and I've given you only a small sample. This is probably a 10% sample of the studies that are done. As it turns out, measuring well-being, that is how well you're doing individually, and positive emotions, and virtuous practices, which I'll show you in just a minute, predicted overall all-cause mortality, that is death from any cause, heart attacks, and cancer survival rates in 1,250 coronary disease patients who are middle-aged, 941 Dutch elderly, followed over a 9-year period of time, 1,306 Boston residents from 21 to 80, 193 stem cell patients. These are people who are getting stem cell therapy. 320 Scandinavian twins. They were taking twins who were separated and looking at the differences. And so on. That is, boy, over and over and over again, you end up having positive results emerge from having people experience positive or virtuous or uplifting relationships and experiences. Okay, here's just another set of individual studies as well. This study is a study where you create a stress. And how you do that, you put people's hand in a bucket of ice. Leave it there for about a minute, and pretty soon your heart rate goes up and blood pressure goes up. And then you simply measure how fast they recover. These are people trained in virtuous practices. And I'll tell you more about that. That's kindness and generosity and helpfulness and compassion and forgiveness and so on. You simply recover faster. Heart rate variability is a real good predictor of longevity. As it turns out, much more heart rate variability. This is a study of multiple sclerosis patients. Over a 2-year period of time, these people were put in 2 different groups. One set of MS patients were required to place a call once a week, supporting, caring for, helping, supporting somebody else. The other half received a phone call expressing care, support, love, and so on. At the end of 2 years, there was an 8-fold difference in measures of well-being, self-efficacy, physical activity, hope, and depression. 8 times better outcomes when people received rather than give. The results of that, whatever I said. What I said is, when you give, better to give than receive. So this, I'm going to show you in just a minute some other. So on the individual level, the whole point is there's a bunch of evidence, hard to dismiss, that says positive makes a difference individually. This work is all about organizations, because organizations are different, because they're more complex. You can have a lot of positive people in a room, does not make for a great organization. So this is just a recent study. I wouldn't go to the mat defending this work, but this work was published by a guy who, after he just barely became, just retired, and he said, okay, 40 years of being a consultant, here's what I've done. He took 84 companies and simply asked people to rate the virtuousness of their CEO on these 4 dimensions. So integrity and responsibility and forgiveness and compassion. And then he simply measured over a 2-year period of time what happens to ROI, return on investment, financial performance. It turns out highly virtuous CEOs had an average of 9.3% ROI versus non-virtuous CEOs 1.93% ROI. I mean, he claims, you know what, the virtuousness of the CEO makes a difference financially. So whether or not you believe employee ratings, I'm not sure, but I believe this one. This one, Carlos, my colleague Carlos right here, and I did this study in which we took 30 healthcare organizations. Over a period of time, we simply measured the extent to which they were improving in virtuous practices versus remaining the same or declining. Those that improved, as it turns out, have a double-digit improvement in these outcomes over a 2-year period of time. Now, it's hard to create double-digit improvement in healthcare organizations, but that's the kind of thing we got. This is a study of financial service organizations. Now, look, financial service organizations are the least likely place you'd ever expect positivity, virtuousness, to be relevant at all. I mean, if I'm in a financial services organization, I got one goal, and that is, show me the money. I want improvement in profitability. So 40 firms, some of which took it more seriously than others, so we had variance across these 40 companies. Those that got better, as it turns out, improved financial performance significantly. We could account for that R square stands for the amount of variance accounted for. We could account for almost half the financial performance. I mean, that's so strong that I'm not sure I believe it, but it's an enormously powerful factor. And it's not only financial performance, but we get very strong relationships and other things. This is not change scores, this is just how high their virtuousness score was. And turnover, and engagement, and customer retention, and managerial ratings of how well they're doing on the basis of the senior executives. In other words, we actually have data that says, you know what, you take this seriously, it actually helps your organization perform better. Now, here are the dimensions that we measure. So when I talk about virtuousness or virtuous practices, we're talking about stuff that's it's kind of grandmother's advice. This is not very sophisticated, not rocket science. You know, it's gratitude and respect and support and compassion and so on. Purpose and meaningfulness, inspiration and so on. So that's what we've got when we talk about virtuous practices. All right, now, second criticism or second set of issues have to do with these as examples. So look, positive research, say some, reinforces and is applicable only to the existing Western socioeconomic system and value system. It's Eurocentric, US-centric, especially emphasizing individualism, capitalism, and Western definitions of thriving and happiness. The West is superimposing its dominance on the rest of the world. And positive psychology and positive organization scholarship represent the perpetuation of a values-based perspective. It's not rigorous and it's not scientific. If you have a value set, of course you're going to find what you want. It's all biased. And POS is a white middle-class bias and ignores the plight of minorities and disadvantaged groups. Poverty, inequality, injustice, repression, other societal problems are ignored. Legitimate criticisms. In the International Positive Psychology Association Congress, which was held just this past summer, had countries represented on this list that all provided research. That is, presentations were made by folks in Argentina and so on, and China, and Israel, and Japan, and Nepal, and Poland, and Russia, and Singapore, and South Africa, and South Korea, none of which are Eurocentric, US-centric, Western bias. So, in fact, I would say we have to be very cautious and have to be very humble about this. On the other hand, this is not just a Eurocentric or US-centric phenomena. It's happening all over the world. And as it turns out, not only was research produced by these 31 or 2 countries, but 50 different countries were represented in the attendees. It's a global phenomena. Plus, here are examples of the countries in which this research is being produced. So, academic achievement in Bhutan, these are all papers that were presented this last summer. Or happiness in Chinese teams and trust among Chinese retirees and transforming culture in Ukraine and optimal environments in French schools and body image in Singapore and purpose and well-being in Hispanic women, test construction in India, education models for India, PsyCap, that's psychological capital in Africa, NGOs, secondary students in Singapore, Buddhist mind training, and so on. New Zealand intercultural semantics. So those are examples of the countries that are doing research. Here are the kinds of topics. And the question is this simply a positive Pollyanna-ish happiness, happyology phenomena, or is it much more likely to handle negative topics? Well, here again are topics presented at IPA. And I won't go through all these, but anxiety and resilience and compassion and disability and forensic patients and decreased happiness and psychotherapy and at-risk students and disorders and black HIVs and Parkinson's disease patients and kidney disease patients and psychosis patients and traumatic brain injury and HIV and character strengths and so on. That is, the criticism is legitimate, but it's relatively narrow because this is the phenomena is becoming much broader than what we normally are aware of. So lots and lots of social issues, and we have to continue to be very sensitive to social issues, but it's not as if it's being ignored. One other, I just like this study. This is a doctoral dissertation on which I served. The person who did this, the woman who did this study, is in New Zealand. She took the leadership framework that happens to be perpetuated in this book, and she said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to superimpose this on the government. In particular, she used the customs officers in New Zealand. And they all got together. She gave them some training sessions. They all made commitments they were going to implement this. 5 days later, the worst earthquake that's ever hit New Zealand. They all got together and said, well, we got a crisis on our hands. This is really difficult. Should we just give up on this positive baloney? Is it just too smiley-faced and Pollyannish for us? They said, no, we're not going to do it. We're going to see how it works in a real crisis, when we're not just sitting back having happiness talks. Well, as it turns out, lots to say about this, but they had the following goals. Reducing sick days exceeded goals. Quality, accuracy, activity reports, efficiency, data mismatches, and they didn't get the primary processing and reduced annual leave goal hit. They made progress, but they didn't hit them. That is, they exceeded goals they expected. And that's what the dissertation was. Does this work in a crisis? Does it work in an unusual place? And, these are just quotations that emerged from her interviews. But, in the beginning, I practiced the positive leadership framework as a thing I had to think about. Then it got to be habitual, I think. And that's sort of what happened to this group of folks. Okay. Third issue. Narrowness, simplicity. For example, POS seems to me to be warmed over power of positive thinking from the 40s and 50s. There's nothing new here, and the findings are mostly common sense. The term positive connotes the more pizzazz than substance, and the field has garnered attention merely because the findings are simply reasonable. I mean, how can you argue with this stuff? POS is merely a focus on happyology and is oversimplified and superficial. It's oriented toward prescriptions of universal rules for flourishing. Just be happy and everything's going to be fine. But life's complex, and a focus on only the positive is simply wishful thinking. You're living in a dream world. POS implies that the rest of scholarly research is negative. It bans negativity and negative phenomena from scientific exploration and workplace dynamics. So you're only taking a look at half the world. Okay, well, just a few... A few studies to kind of respond to those issues. That is it common sense and warmed over happyology? So here's a study. It's done by an organization called HeartMath. They study heart rhythms. Here's your heart rhythms when you're upset. Here's your heart rhythms when you're in a gratitude state. And by the way, it happens in exactly the same way in a compassionate state, in a forgiveness state, in a generosity state. That is virtuous states. As it turns out, over time, people live on the average of 11 years longer, and you can see why. This is a study done where the study was simply taking people, asking them to think about, ponder, or contemplate a positive, optimistic future. Now I've got you in a mental set. Now I'm going to put you through an MRI machine. I'm going to scan your brain, As it turns out, more areas of your brain are activated in a positive condition, and of those activated, they're activated to a greater extent. You literally are smarter. Your brain works better in a positive state. It's called heliotropic effect. You don't have to choose this. It just works. This study, one of our colleagues, Barbara Fredrickson, and one of her doctoral students, you have, some of you know this because you're medical doctors. I see anyway, several of you are wonderful and have taught us a lot who are in the medical profession. You have a vagus nerve. It goes from the back of your brainstem down around your heart and back, controls your heart rhythms, controls internal organs. She simply induces a positive or sometimes virtuous state. You can get a significant improvement in vagal tone, or in other words, heart rhythms, internal organs, your nervous system works better. That's kind of counterintuitive, not exactly happyology. This is a study where they simply took 9th grade literature students. These are people studying literature, reading Shakespeare. Now look, most literature is tragedy, right? Great literature. I don't know, the majority is probably tragedy, not all of it's tragedy. So most of these students are reading King Lear, or Macbeth or something. Part of them were exposed to training in virtuousness, kindness, gratitude, purpose, and nobility. The other half were not. At the end of the semester, they simply measured performance. Performance were social skills, how well they got along with each other. Zest, excitement, involvement in learning. Writing competence, an absence of depression. Big difference. And then this one down here, this is what we simply did studies of the trucking industry. Again, trying to pick an industry where nobody cares about this. I mean, what do truckers care about this stuff? But what we did is we essentially measured the extent to which they were implementing virtuous practices, and we get a regression line that's reasonably suggestive. It's certainly statistically significant. The more virtuousness you practice, the higher the performance on 6 different outcomes. And then this one I like a lot. One of our psychologist colleagues did the following study. She took entering freshmen at the University of Michigan, 18, 19-year-old kids. She asked them to identify their goals for the year. Now, everybody has lots of goals, but she categorized the goals into 2 types. One were called achievement goals. I want to get good grades. I want to make the team. I want a girlfriend. I want to be popular. The other one was what are called contribution goals. I want to contribute. I want to make a difference. I want to have something to get better because of what I've done. She put people in 2 groups depending on which type of goal was dominant. Then she simply, the experiment or the study was she simply followed these students for 1 year, measuring things like how well they got along with their roommates, how many minor physiological symptoms, headache, nausea, backache, cramps, how many times they missed class, what their grade point averages were, how many times they got elected to an office in a club or made the team or something. On every single dimension, contribution goals trumped achievement goals. It's what I was reminded of just a minute by my friend Bob. That is, contributing is much better, more powerful than receiving. Now, what's interesting about that is most organizations have incentive systems entirely based on giving people stuff. If you perform well, I'm going to give you a reward, increase your salary, put your picture in a newspaper. The question is, do we ever flip that and say, because you perform so well, I'm going to give you a chance to contribute? Mentor? Assist somebody else? Make a contribution? Turns out it pays off more. And one of the sort of contrary findings, not happyology, but holy cow, I had never recognized that. It's just sort of counterintuitive that's emerging out of this positive research. Whoops. Okay. 4th, manipulation, unethical issues. So, could be represented by these statements. Look, positive interventions manipulate clients and employees. People are made to feel good in order to coerce them from them certain outcomes. Virtuousness, engagement, positive emotions are manipulative techniques used to take advantage of workers. You're just making people happy because you want them to give you more stuff, or work harder, or stay at the office longer. The values of POS are not conducive to an increase in human freedom, only to conformity. You're trying to make everybody happy. Researchers and practitioners overclaim the benefits of the positive and may actually do harm to people and organizations. Look, all of these have some legitimate truth to them. We have to be very cautious about being defensive, and I hope I don't come off as defensive. But often, the criticisms are a product of simply being unaware of what's available. Here's just one of two slides. This is one of our colleagues. Some of you know this person, Jim Malazzi. I was brought into Prudential Retirement in the spring of 2004 as the head of integration. The company had just acquired a big division from the Cigna Corporation, and we were trying to merge two cultures together. In the beginning, it was like trying to merge the Red Sox and the Yankees. We had two distinct cultures, one from New England, one the other from the New York, New Jersey area. Both are very strong, very passionate, very powerful. As you can imagine, trying to put these two cultures together was a challenge. The president at the time happened to be a graduate from the University of Michigan. He'd just come back from a session where he had met with Bob Quinn and Kim Cameron and learned something about positive organization scholarship. He brought them into the company to help us create something that was really different and outstandingly unique. Then the results. We kept 95% of our clients. Completely outrageous. Nobody does that. Our annual employee satisfaction scores and employee opinion surveys and survey results increased. We had less voluntary turnover. The earnings of the company started growing at about 20% per annum at a compound rate. I think the POS helped us create the benchmark for how you take two distinct companies and put them together. Now, manipulating people, maybe, except satisfaction goes up, voluntary turnover goes down. Here's another. We started with a variety of exercises to show our employees that when you start with the positive, fabulous things can happen. This is another company. We went from an $80 million loss to a $20 million profit that year. We actually achieved 2 times our expected business plan. We doubled our profits from what we'd expected. Our employee satisfaction scores went up in 9 out of 12 categories. Could be manipulation, but that wouldn't account for satisfaction scores going up. And then here's just another. I won't read this whole thing, but over a year, Prudential scored above average on 24 of the positive practices. Moreover, improvement occurred in 35 of 38 positive practices between 2005 and 2006. The correlation between positive practice scores and 6 aggregated measures of financial performance was 0.49, significant, particularly significant. That is, it sure enough helps organizations get better. Sure enough, performance goes up. Sure enough, employees produce more. But it's not as if they're suffering. As it turns out, it looks like people try to do this. Now, the paradox of this whole issue, and we've got one more issue, is that virtuousness and positivity are what are called goods of first intent. That is, Aristotle said there are 2 kinds of goods, goods of first intent, goods of second intent. Goods of second intent are only valuable if you can use them to get something else. So I can put a whole stack of $1,000 bills in front of you. There's no value in that stack of bills unless you can use it to get something else. So those are goods of second intent. Virtues, virtuousness, positivity is a good of first intent, inherently good in and of itself. You don't need anything else. That's all we need. But to pursue virtuousness, in other words, in organizations, is its own reward. But most people are accountable for outcomes. I mean, we've got to have financial performance. We've got to have customer satisfaction going up. We've got to capture market share. And one of the things that's really interesting about this work is we've actually uncovered evidence that the pursuit of virtuousness and positivity does in fact elevate outcomes for which executives are accountable, even though they don't need to. So as it turns out, for me, this whole notion of positive and virtuousness is not manipulative at all, because if we do it for no other reason than it's good for people, that's enough. Except it also pays off in another way. Okay, last set of issues, practice issues. A local issue here in the Ross School is, look, emphasizing the positive here privileges a small group of faculty members and narrows rather than expands the Ross School's mission and impact. Plus, in addition, many people claim to practice positive principles without proper grounding in behavioral sciences. An emphasis on the positive is merely a way for consultants and change agents to earn a better stipend. And they're doing harm, frankly, because they don't know what they're doing. Practice and interventions tend to be narrow and biased. Same techniques are repeated but without substantial empirical backing. And then finally, POS should not be used in the policy arena because of aggregation, definition, a bunch of other things. So there are several countries who are measuring well-being and positive factors. That's really misleading them. They shouldn't be doing such a thing. So just a few suggestions about my response to that. So at the beginning of the year, you can't see this, but here are the goodies put on the desks of every staff member. Jennifer? Faculty support in the building. Yeah. Nobody said you had to do it, they just did it. Here are flowers that show up on a regular basis. Here, you've seen these mindful meditation on our screen, on our boards, on the electronic boards. These kinds of things happen. As it turns out, 21st was World Gratitude Day, and bingo, staff at the Ross School made that a big deal. And Jennifer, who's in the room, is one of the initiators. And the staff have created for themselves lunch and learn sessions on the competing values framework and positive leadership and supportive communication, envisioning and preferred futuring and lift and the fundamental state of leadership and high quality connections. As they're taking this stuff and actually making it work, nobody's rewarding them. Nobody's giving them extra funding. No students are giving them grades. They're just doing it because they're making a difference. And they've got mindfulness at Ross sessions. One of the senior leaders in the school made the following statement, and I didn't get permission to use a statement, so I'm not going to attribute it to anybody. But the statement was made very near this. These words, I think, are exactly what he said. The economic miracle. When our current dean took over, we had the equivalent of about an $80 million expendable budget. We had a debt of almost $40 million. Now, if you're in debt, 50% of your revenues, that's a big hole. Paid off in 3 years. I mean, how do you do that? The economic miracle that occurred in the Ross School could not have occurred without the change in culture created by the positive strategic pillar. That is, that's the oil, that's the grease, that's the mechanism by which that could happen. Mary Cecchinesi, who's also in the room, has presented 160 different presentations to 3,700 participants at the University of Michigan, healthcare organization, engineering, central administration, all over the place, on her own, simply taking positive principles and positive practices. I mean, I think it's wonderful. You can't see this, but this is a T-shirt that's been created by the University of Michigan Health System. I think that says positive deviance. Is that true, some of you in the medical system? Betsy Irwin, who's in the room as well, runs this inspiring and incredible set of activities, 120 applicants this year for 24 plus lab slots. That is, students volunteer, they come and get involved, they do projects. It's on their own, they're not getting paid, but it got 120 students say, please let me in. 75 students total have done CPO projects this year. 40 students in this thing called Magnify. They actually get 6 credits for that, but anyway. The whole point is extraordinary practice that's being simply voluntarily uncovered and implemented. Now, my friend Bob and I have had an opportunity to do something just really inspiring. We got called up by a guy whose name is Steve Wasco, who said, I need to help train some of our folks. And what have you got available that we could use to train? And Bob and I said, we have dedicated at least some of our time to help Detroit on a pro bono basis. We'll be glad to help you do this. And Steve said, yeah, but we got an emergency manager whose name is Darnell Early, and he's the 4th emergency manager. He's appointed by the governor, and we got to get him on board. We said, fine with us. So we met with those guys. And I only got the 2013-14. I don't have the 14-15 data, but here's the issue. And this is divided by broken out by ethnic groups. Asians had, in terms of college readiness, 17% in Detroit, 43% in all of Michigan. White Caucasian students 5.8, Hispanic students 2. I can't see it here. I need to look on my other slide. Black students 2.9% of students are college ready when they graduate. That's the problem. Not to mention that $7,600 a day is being spent in interest payments every day in that school system. $1,200 per student per year. Think of what you could do with $1,200 per student in your class every year. That's now being used simply to pay interest. Because the deficit this year is $166 million. Over the last 10 years has been $1.28 billion. There are now 47,000 students. That's a 68% loss. Used to be 150,000 students in this school system. So you can just close schools all over the place, but if you do that, nobody's going to move into that neighborhood because there are no schools. So businesses are not going to be created. So Detroit will not turn around without a great school system. People are getting paid less than they did 10 years ago. Hardly any professional development. Well, we've done several workshops with folks, principals and senior executives and a whole bunch of people. Darnell has turned 90 people into his transformation team. They're empowered to make big changes in this organization. And given this really, really challenging environment, Bob asked one teacher one day in one of these sessions, or principal, as a principal, why in the world do you do this? You know, you're getting offers in all kinds of other school districts. Why stay here? And the answer is, we do it because of the kids. We're not going to lose an entire generation of people because the school system is not helping, not doing what they want. We want more than 2.8% college ready. And I want to end on this one. Right? Okay. I'm going to read this to you. It's one of our MBA grads. I just like it. So here's what she said, and I've asked her permission to share this. She now lives in California. This summer, after graduation, I chose to undergo preventative double mastectomy and breast reconstruction, not your typical post-MBA plans. A few years ago, I found out that I had this particular gene mutation and an 88% chance of having breast cancer in my lifetime. My mother and grandmother also have that gene and were diagnosed with breast cancer when they were in their early 30s. As a woman in my late 20s, I felt timing was right to take the preemptive strike against breast cancer with this procedure. Little did I know that my time at Ross would impact this experience. After scheduling the surgery, I clearly remember sitting in, this happens to be my class, but it could have been a dozen classes. It could have been Jane's class or Bob's class or Gretchen's class or Wayne's class. Could be many classes. Happened to be this one. Hearing all the research behind the power of positive thinking. More specifically, he mentioned that patients with a positive attitude recover faster after surgery. Obviously, this struck a personal note with me, and I started to think, how could I approach this experience, something that I could see as a terrible and traumatizing experience, with a positive attitude? How could I maintain a positive attitude during the 3-month reconstruction and recovery process? And how could I leverage this experience to have a positive impact on others? I mean, I admire her a lot for even thinking about it. I doubt I would have asked myself these questions if I did not attend Ross. Ross had fundamentally shifted my mindset, I think. Well, positive. So I decided to start a blog to chronicle my surgery and recovery. By publicly blogging about my experience, I held myself personally accountable for maintaining a positive attitude, and I hope to help other young women with the same gene mutation as well as they contemplated their choices. After brainstorming different titles for my blog, I settled on Positive Previvor. So women who undergo preventative double mastectomy are called breast cancer previvors. To signal my commitment that I was going into this experience with a positive mindset, I started each blog by sharing something I was grateful for. The power of gratitude was another lesson I learned at Ross. 6 weeks after my surgery, and 10 blog posts later, I can tell you that the positive approach I learned at Ross dramatically affected my recovery. While it was not the best summer of my life, and there were a couple of not so great weeks, My overall recovery has been better than expected, and I'm very happy with my decision. Most importantly, other young women with a gene mutation have already reached out to me after seeing my blog. Knowing that I'm helping others has been incredibly fulfilling. Well, last paragraph. Another major takeaway I learned from Ross is if you put out positive energy, it will return to you. The amount of support I received from my blog has been shocking and overwhelming. People from all different chapters of my life have reached out to me, and it definitely helped me through my low moments. In particular, the Ross community has gone above and beyond, sending me messages, emails, cards, gifts, and even helping me move across the country. At Ross, it is the norm to help and support each other, which is a distinguishing characteristic of the school. I mean, what other business school would organize a month of gratitude where students send more than 1,000 thank you notes to each other, which is part of this Plus Lab? Well, for me, a lot of criticisms are legitimate. I mean, we can't dismiss the fact that the validity police may help us get a lot better. The refinement that emerges from this will be helpful. On the other hand, empirical evidence, in fact, is building a lot in place already, that positivity and virtuousness significantly affect individuals at the basic levels, and they affect organization performance at levels where we're held accountable. And there are theories. And the conclusion is this: you can choose to live in the front row or in the third row. Take your pick. All right.
Thank you, Kim Cameron. I'm going to invite you all to a special reception that's going to be held in the faculty lounge after a special thank you to Kim. Now, Kim has no idea that this is going to happen, so I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Bob Quinn.
Thank you, Jane. I want to tell you two stories about Kim Cameron. The first one occurred about a week ago. I've spent a lot of time in the last 40 years in the same room with this man doing a variety of things. We were listening to a presentation, and the person who was presenting said, "What's your response?" And Kim Cameron raised his hand and said, "It makes me want to be a better person. I have to spend my spare time more productively helping people." If you know Kim Cameron, he has no spare time because he spends it all helping people. I think that was very significant. The second was when Jane did the introduction and described the 120 journal articles and the books and all the other things, at which point my wife leaned over and said, "He really is impressive."
She's known me for a long time. She knows that's not true.
And in keeping with her observation, a few months ago, Kim was given an award by George Mason University. It was a Lifetime Achievement Award. And Jane and a number of others began talking about that. And we began to take stock of just how much he has contributed to Ross and to our lives personally. And we resolved to have our own Lifetime Achievement Award for Kim Cameron. And so there's a very special man who has also worked for years and years with Kim, and he stepped forward and said, "I know what the artifact, as Jane would say, should be." Now, Carlos, do you want to come up here and share that artifact with us?
Sure. Carlos Mora, we've been doing research together for 20 years. He's maybe the best methodologist on the planet. He's the best research methodologist I know. Oh my goodness. Wow.
Carlos, you want to tell them what's on there?
Yeah.
I'll hold it.
Okay. It's a mobile that represents milestones in Kim's life. We have do you have the link?
We do, sometimes. Where's the clicker?
You're right.
Ah, thank you.
This is the theory part. The positive energy is not seen clearly, but it's half a battery with a positive end. This is it. And then the competing values, the amplifying, buffering, and heliotropic effect that act as mediators, enhancing the positive practices into organizational outcomes. This is the virtuous continuum. These are emblems from universities where Kim has spent time. Of course, Michigan is a special place. But we have Yale, we have Wisconsin, we have Brigham Young, and we have Case Western. And these are some of these publications. There are 7 of them altogether. But the important fact is the framework in which we put all these recognitions. It is an equilibrium piece, which Kim does very well by not sleeping much. And indicates motion. And from Newton, to move, you need energy. So to the man of positive energy that keeps a good balance in life with our deep love.
You are terrific. I love you.